Breaking news out of the Middle East hit the wire just after 7:15 in the evening Eastern Time, and the anchor's voice carried the particular flatness that comes with genuine surprise. US CENTCOM had just confirmed it. American forces were launching the third round of strikes that week against Iran, this time in direct response to an IRGC attack on a Cyprus-flagged container ship transiting the Strait of Hormuz. The vessel in testimony was the motor vessel Galaxy, a commercial cargo ship doing nothing more than moving freight through one of the most heavily trafficked waterways on the planet. One crew member was missing. The ship's engine room had taken significant damage. There was fire on board. The Galaxy wasn't going anywhere under its own power. It would have to be towed to port, assuming the situation allowed for that much. Sitting across from the anchor was a retired Marine intelligence officer, a national security analyst who had spent enough years watching this particular region to speak about it without the breathless uncertainty that infects live television. The conversation moved fast. CENTCOM's statement was precise. Iran had been given yet another opportunity to demonstrate adherence to a memorandum of understanding, had failed again, and the United States was now imposing what the statement called a heavy cost, continuing to degrade Iran's ability to threaten civilian mariners and commercial ships transiting the strait. The strikes were being carried out at the direction of the commander-in-chief. That line at the end of the CENTCOM statement was not an accident. It was a signal. The target picture that evening looked familiar. Coastal radars along the shoreline from the Strait of Hormuz north into the Persian Gulf. Drone facilities, anti-ship missile batteries, surface-to-air missile systems. And then the gunboats, the small, fast Revolutionary Guard Corps vessels that had proliferated across the Persian Gulf for decades. The previous round of strikes had reportedly destroyed more than 60 of them. Possibly far more than 60. Those numbers never come out cleanly. This time, there would likely be more. What made the night genuinely strange was the timing. Earlier that same day, Iran's foreign minister had landed in Oman at the head of a delegation. The explicit purpose of the visit was to rekindle negotiations, to explore a diplomatic path forward after weeks of back-and-forth strikes had pushed both sides to the edge of something much larger. The ink on previous agreements had barely dried before Iran had moved to violate them. And now, while the foreign minister sat in Muscat talking about peace, someone in the Iranian chain of command had ordered an attack on a commercial ship in what appeared to be Omani waters. That contradiction, diplomacy in Oman, missiles in the strait, pointed to something the analyst had been watching build for weeks. There was a fracture inside the Iranian government. Not a rumor, not speculation, but a documented, observable split between the political leadership and a faction within the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps that appeared to be operating with an entirely separate set of priorities. Foreign ministers could fly to Oman. Presidents and speakers of parliament could authorize agreements. But this cell, this hardline element inside the Revolutionary Guard, seemed to answer to no one currently visible in Tehran's power structure. That invisibility was the thing that kept analysts up at night. 5 days had passed since the funeral of Ali Khamenei. 5 days of public ceremony, of crowds and speeches, and the formal transfer of supreme authority to his son, Mojtaba Khamenei. And in those 5 days, the new supreme leader had not appeared. Not once. Not at the funeral. Not in public. Not on state media in any verifiable, live format. Statements had been read in his name. People had claimed to have spoken with him. But no one had seen him, not since the strike that killed his father. Whether that was precaution, incapacity, or something worse, no one would say publicly. And the absence of a controlling hand at the top of the Iranian system was beginning to show in real time, in the form of attacks on cargo ships while diplomats were mid-flight to negotiating tables. The legal concept that governs moments like this is proportionality. Under the law of armed conflict, a response must be proportionate to the provocation. What American forces were doing, striking radars, missile systems, drone infrastructure, and fast boats along hundreds of miles of coastline, was, in the formal sense, proportionate. But it was also something else. It was a demonstration of capability, a message delivered in the language of precision strikes to make clear that Iranian behavior in the strait carried a cost that would keep rising. And then there was the question that nobody was officially answering. Who else was flying strike missions that night? After the previous series of strikes, additional airstrikes had continued after the US had publicly announced it had stopped. No one claimed responsibility. Iran pointed, with some anger, at the United Arab Emirates, accusing it of supporting American military operations. The UAE said nothing in return. The silence itself was informative. Several Gulf states operate extremely capable air forces, flying advanced strike aircraft that the United States had sold them and trained their pilots to fly. If one or more of those countries had decided quietly to participate in degrading Iran's military infrastructure, the combined strike capacity available to hit Iranian targets could double or triple overnight. The Iranians understood that math. The message embedded in the ambiguity was deliberate. The question that hung over all of it was the one that never goes away in conflicts like this. How does it end? Or at least, how does it slow down enough for someone to put a phone call through? History suggested that Iran eventually comes to the table when economic pain becomes unsustainable. Every previous cycle of strikes had followed an arc: escalation, retaliation, a brief window of exhaustion, and then a return to negotiation, however fragile. The agreements never held cleanly. The Revolutionary Guard faction always found a way to test them. But the negotiations happened anyway, because the alternative was worse for everyone. The problem this time was the missing center of gravity. If Mujtaba Khamenei was alive and governing, there was no evidence of it. If the political leadership could negotiate agreements that a faction of its own military felt free to ignore, then agreements meant nothing. The US was fighting a government that might not control itself, trying to communicate through strikes to an audience that might not have a unified ear to hear the message. That is the kind of situation where a short skirmish can stop being short. The anchor noted, somewhere around 9 in the evening Eastern, that the news wires had gone quiet for about 45 minutes. No new strikes reported, no new statements. Whether that was a genuine pause or just the lag between action and reporting was impossible to say. The conversation turned briefly to a mention of updates in the Russia-Ukraine war, a reminder that the world had more than one crisis running at the same time. But the Persian Gulf was where the night belonged. A cargo ship sitting disabled and on fire in contested waters. A crew member missing somewhere in the darkness. A government that might not be governing. And strike aircraft overhead, speaking the only language currently being heard, wondering, as perhaps you are right now, whether there is anyone on the other side who has both the authority and the will to answer back in a different one.